ESPN has once again displayed outright disrespect toward Caitlin Clark, continuing to push their biased perspectives.
How can you be a top 5 player if you have not won a title?
They do leave Caitlin Clark out for the simple reason of not having a championship ring.
What about getting Iowa to the championship in back-to-back years? Is that not impressive?
Do you believe Larry Bird is an all-time great college player?
Yes.
Okay, well, he didn't win it, though.
The thumbnail of the video and the title is presented like this. Is Caitlin Clark the greatest of all time in college basketball? Clearly using Caitlin Clark's name to drive it, knowing that Caitlin Clark is the biggest needle mover. Not only is Caitlin Clark not even really on their list, she got removed from the list.
Just when you think ESPN can't undermine her achievements any further, they completely exclude her from their ranking of the top 5 greatest women's college basketball players ever.
Only strike against Caitlin Clark is that she has not won a national championship. And that is the only thing that you can put against her.
Caitlin Clark took Iowa to back-to-back national championship games.
And yet, their reasoning remains the same. She hasn't won a title. This is the same network that has recognized male players as legends, regardless of whether they secured a championship or not. But suddenly, when it comes to Caitlin Clark, championships become the only factor that matters?
But I do find it interesting that they do tout off all her accomplishments, records that have not been broken by anybody else, and they still cannot consider her in the top 5 best category.
We're not falling for their inconsistency. In this video, we will break down how ESPN is actively diminishing Clark's legacy, favoring certain narratives, and rewriting history to align with their agenda. Stay with us as we expose their double standards, piece by piece.
I just don't understand how you can see someone doing more with less in some aspects, but in this one, you can't see it, you can't give them credit for that.
ESPN's favoritism was evident when they conveniently removed Caitlin Clark from their all-time top 5 list for women's college basketball. Their justification? She hasn't won a championship ring. But here's the problem. This rule has never been applied to other players in their rankings. ESPN has consistently honored numerous male and female athletes who never won a national title. Yet when it comes to Caitlin Clark, suddenly the only factor that matters is winning a championship.
Clark is being used as like a ploy. You know, they got to put Caitlin Clark's name in the title. They got to make sure, you think you're watching something about Caitlin Clark, and then the rug is kind of pulled out when it's actually like, nah, she's not even in the top 5.
Take Oscar Robertson and Pete Maravich, 2 of the most celebrated players in college basketball history. Neither of them ever won a national championship, yet ESPN had no problem ranking them among the greatest of all time. Meanwhile, Caitlin Clark didn't just set records, she completely redefined them, while leading her team to consecutive national championship games.
If that's your number 1 criterion, if you don't win a championship, you can't be on any list, fine. She made the point that Caitlin has exploded the game bigger than anybody else. That's part of the significance, and I guess you could say the greatness.
The hypocrisy here is overwhelming. If championships were the ultimate requirement, then why was Larry Bird, another legendary college basketball figure who never won a title, ranked so highly? The truth is crystal clear. ESPN is applying a completely different standard to Caitlin Clark.
For somebody who went to a team like Iowa, who did not have championship experience, who did not have stars around her, and it is undeniable that there is one player that brought Iowa to the championship that raised everybody else up around her, and their name is Caitlin Clark.
But it gets even worse. The way ESPN handled this wasn't just dismissive. It was outright manipulative. They strategically used Clark's name and image to promote their segment, fully aware that she is the most recognizable name in women's basketball.
Ranking players based on having a ring, a bit of an unfair way just to rank a player's potential.
Viewers were led to believe Clark would be celebrated alongside the greatest players, only for her to be completely removed from the discussion. This wasn't just an oversight. It was a calculated move to profit from her popularity while simultaneously refusing to acknowledge her true impact. ESPN is happy to use Caitlin Clark's success to generate views, but when it comes to giving her the credit she deserves, they suddenly shift the criteria. Even their own analysts admitted on air that leaving Clark off the list felt wrong. They acknowledged that she has dominated women's basketball in a way no one else has before.
Here's the thing. Love Caitlyn. Love how she's transcended the game. I'm not going to go away from that. But in the Open, we said, what makes a top 5 player? Winning. The only strike against Caitlyn Clark is that she has not won a national championship. And that is the only thing that you can put against her, because the way she has dominated the record books when she was at Iowa was something you cannot duplicate. She's a 3-time NCAA scoring leader and assist leader, a true point guard for the people, 3-time All-American, 2-time Naismith Player of the Year, 2-time AP Player of the Year, all-time leading scorer. She broke the records of Kelsey Plum and Sabrina. Like, literally, there is nobody who has been such a front-facing name. It through a direct reflection of her skill set, but how can you be a top 5 player if you have not won a title?
It's a great point, which is why I agree with you.
Yet, ESPN's response remains the same. How can you be a top 5 player if you haven't won a title? It's a fair question, but if winning a championship is the only requirement for greatness, then why are individual awards even given out? Basketball is a team sport. No single player wins a championship on their own.
Whenever anybody says, oh, she didn't win a championship, how do they respond back when you say, who else was on her team? What about getting Iowa to the championship in back-to-back years? Is that not impressive?
If you don't think that Caitlyn Clark is one of the top 5 basketball players of all time, but for the simple reason of not winning a championship, I do have to disagree. Championships are definitely a team recognition. They are something that a team does together and accomplishes.
If someone doesn't believe Caitlyn Clark is one of the top 5 greatest women's college basketball players simply because she didn't win a title, that's a weak argument. Championships are a team achievement, something a group accomplishes together. Clark didn't just thrive at Iowa. She shattered records, elevated the game, and led a program with no championship history to consecutive national title games. That alone should secure her a spot in the top 5, if not the number 1 ranking. ESPN conveniently glossed over her unparalleled individual statistics. So let's break down the numbers they don't want people to focus on. Take Breanna Stewart, who is on ESPN's list. She played at UConn, surrounded by multiple future WNBA stars. When you're part of a team stacked with talent at UConn or South Carolina, winning a national championship is almost expected. But isn't it more impressive when a player stays at a smaller program, isn't surrounded by elite talent, and still takes her team to the national championship? What's more impressive? Dominating with a stacked team or carrying an underdog to the top? Caitlyn Clark owns the all-time scoring record in both men's and women's college basketball. That alone cements her as one of the greatest ever. But here's the thing. Her impact went beyond just scoring. She was an elite playmaker, a floor general, and a leader who elevated her entire team. She didn't just put up numbers, she made everyone around her better. Breanna Stewart won titles, but look at the teams she played on. There's no denying Breanna Stewart's greatness. 4-time national champion, 2-time AP Player of the Year, 2-time Naismith Player of the Year, 2-time Wooden Award winner. But here's the real question. Did she play alongside future WNBA stars? Yes. Did she have the luxury of playing in an already dominant system? Yes. Stewart thrived at UConn, a program that was already a basketball dynasty before she even arrived. Meanwhile, Clark, she transformed Iowa from an afterthought into a national powerhouse. ESPN's biggest mistake? Not recognizing Clark's individual greatness. ESPN ranked several players ahead of Clark. But let's be honest, did any of them redefine the sport the way Clark did? That's where the argument falls apart. Put any of those players on Clark's Iowa teams? Would they have led them to back-to-back national title games? Highly doubtful. Clark rewrote the record books. Clark broke barriers. Clark brought the entire sport to new heights, and she did it without an all-time great supporting cast. Clark versus the UConn and South Carolina legends, the real difference. Women's college basketball has always had its powerhouses, UConn, South Carolina, Tennessee. These programs dominated for years because they were stacked with elite talent. Clark, she didn't step into an already great team. She built one from scratch. No WNBA lottery picks as teammates. No elite recruits surrounding her. No built-in championship system. Yet, she still led Iowa to 2 straight national title games. The reality check: could Breanna Stewart have done the same at Iowa? Breanna Stewart thrived in a system full of future WNBA talent. But let's ask the real question. If Stewart played at Iowa instead of UConn, would she have taken that team to the national championship? Would she have shattered the records Clark did? Would she have revolutionized women's basketball? It's highly debatable. Clark didn't just dominate, she changed the game, and that's what truly sets her apart. Breanna Stewart had a dynasty behind her. Clark built one from scratch. Look at Stewart's time at UConn. She played alongside multiple elite teammates, had the best coaching staff in women's basketball history, and was part of a program that expected championships every year. Now, imagine Clark in that system, while Stewart played for Iowa. Would Stewart have carried that team to back-to-back national championship games like Clark did? Probably not. The same argument applies to Cheryl Miller. Cheryl Miller? Undeniably great, but let's not forget, she played at USC with future Hall of Famers. She had top-tier talent surrounding her at all times. Now look at Stewart's current WNBA situation. Even with her talent and experience, the New York Liberty finished as one of the worst teams in the league. Winning at UConn didn't suddenly make her a franchise-changing superstar. Clark, on the other hand, she was the only reason Iowa even had a shot at a national title. Her leadership, court vision, and ability to elevate her teammates turned a mid-level program into a legitimate contender. That level of impact matters way more than just counting championships. ESPN's top 5 women's college basketball players. According to them, Brianda Starker, 3, Diana Taurasi Moore, 5, Cheryl Miller. But let's be real. Clark's greatness isn't just about numbers, it's about how she changed the sport. Clark's impact is bigger than ESPN wants to admit. Before Clark, women's college basketball wasn't drawing record-breaking viewership. That all changed because of her. She filled arenas. She boosted TV ratings to all-time highs. She made WNBA jerseys the hottest-selling gear in sports. And yet, ESPN still left her off their list, completely undermining their own argument. Even their own analysts admitted her impact was unprecedented. The records ESPN conveniently ignored: most points by a point guard in a single WNBA season, most double-doubles by a rookie guard in WNBA history, most points by a rookie in WNBA history, most assists by a rookie in WNBA history, first rookie in WNBA history to record 2 triple-doubles, first rookie in WNBA history to log a triple-double, first triple-double in Indiana Fever history, first player in WNBA history to win both Player of the Month and Rookie of the Month in the same month, first player in WNBA history to record 20-plus points, 15-plus assists in a game. Didn't just set records, she made history. Clark holds even more records: most assists and at least 5 rebounds in a single game, won Rookie of the Month 4 times, named Eastern Conference Player of the Week 3 times, holds the WNBA rookie record for assists in a season, holds the WNBA rookie record for 3-pointers in a season, set a single-game record for assists, 19. And yet, the larger issue remains: ESPN's clear bias. If Caitlin Clark were any other player, she would be treated completely differently. ESPN has consistently downplayed her success while promoting the players they want to elevate. This isn't just about one ranking. It's a repeated pattern of disrespect that has become impossible to ignore. Take ESPN's reasoning for excluding Clark. She didn't win a championship. But, as we've already discussed, they have celebrated plenty of all-time greats who never won a national title. Pete Maravich, Oscar Robertson, Larry Bird. None of them won a college championship. But ESPN never questioned their place among the greatest. When it comes to Caitlin Clark, though, suddenly the rules change. She also holds franchise record for most double-doubles, franchise record for most career 10-plus assist games, fastest WNBA player to reach 100 3-pointers in just 34 games, most assists by a rookie in a WNBA All-Star game, fastest player to reach 350 points and 150 assists to start a season, regardless of years in the league. People often argue that Clark had help, that she didn't do it alone, but LeBron James had teammates. Michael Jordan had teammates. Every great player does. The bias isn't just in rankings, it's in how ESPN covers Clark compared to others. They constantly push narratives that highlight stars like Angel Reese, A'ja Wilson, and South Carolina's dynasty. But when Clark does something historic, they barely acknowledge it. When she set new records, ESPN brushed it off. When she led Iowa to back-to-back national championship games, they focused on the teams that beat her instead. The double standard becomes even clearer when you look at controversies. When Angel Reese taunted Clark in the national championship game, ESPN rushed to defend her, calling it competitive fire. But when Clark showed the same energy on the court, she was labeled as arrogant and disrespectful. It's not just about Reese. It's the entire way ESPN shapes the conversation around Clark. When another player succeeds, ESPN frames it as overcoming adversity. When Clark succeeds, ESPN either ignores it or tries to discredit it. ESPN spends more time covering WNBA players who criticize Clark than actually celebrating her accomplishments. They push the narrative that she's overrated, despite all the statistical and financial proof that says otherwise. It's obvious at this point, ESPN has an agenda when it comes to Caitlin Clark. And the more they try to minimize her impact, the more absurd they look. A former NBA player even talked about working out in the same gym as Clark. He noticed her intense focus and elite shooting ability. She can shoot the lights out. She's a great shooter, and she's one of those people who grinds every day in the gym. He even admitted that he stole her drill after watching her train because of how effective it was. She was running a corner to wing drill. If you missed, you had to start over. She barely missed. That's the level of dedication Clark brings to the game. The reality. Caitlin Clark is the biggest superstar women's basketball has ever seen, and ESPN knows it. They know she's the reason attendance records are being shattered. They know she's responsible for women's college basketball's historic TV ratings. They know she's driving more interest in the WNBA than ever before. Clark has pushed women's basketball into the mainstream like never before. And yet, ESPN refuses to acknowledge her properly, because doing so would contradict the narrative they've built over the years. For a long time, ESPN has positioned certain athletes as the faces of women's basketball. They've invested heavily in promoting specific players as the stars of the sport. But Clark's rise completely shattered that illusion. She didn't just step into the spotlight, she took over. If ESPN were to fully recognize her for what she truly is, they'd have to admit that she has outshined the very players they've spent years hyping up. Instead of embracing that reality, they choose to downplay her influence, leave her out of historic rankings, pretend her impact isn't as groundbreaking as it really is. Cheryl Swoops was one of the many voices who tried to criticize Clark earlier this year. She spoke about issues in the Indiana Fever's locker room, suggesting that players didn't want to be there. But where is she now? Nowhere to be found. Her claims, just like ESPN's biased coverage, don't hold up when you look at the facts. Fans see right through the agenda. No matter how hard the network tries to diminish Clark, the truth is impossible to ignore. Clark has transformed women's basketball in a way no player before her ever has. And that leads to the bigger question. If ESPN is willing to manipulate history now, what will it take for them to finally give Clark the respect she deserves? At this point, ESPN can adjust rankings, shift goalposts, spin the narrative however they want, but they can't erase reality. Caitlin Clark isn't just a great player. She's one of the greatest to ever step on the court. Her impact goes beyond just statistics. She has brought millions of new fans into the sport. She has taken women's basketball to an entirely new level, and no amount of media bias or selective rankings can take that away from her. The Indiana Fever are now the hottest team in women's basketball, and yet some people in the media tried to push the narrative that nobody wanted to play there. That argument makes no sense. What's even more revealing is that ESPN's refusal to properly acknowledge Clark only exposes their real priorities. They're not interested in celebrating true greatness. They're interested in pushing their chosen narratives. They will continue to protect certain players while downplaying others. Ignore the fact that Clark has done more to grow the game than any player in recent history. But here's what ESPN doesn't understand. Fans don't need their approval. Clark's legacy isn't defined by manipulated rankings, cherry-picked talking points. Her legacy is defined by her records, her influence, the millions of people who support her. Years from now, no one will remember ESPN's rankings. They will remember the undeniable truth of what Caitlin Clark accomplished. So let ESPN continue playing their games, because while they're busy rewriting history, Caitlin Clark is out here making it, and the world is watching.